Welcome, everyone, to Wizards and Warp Drives, the podcast where three grown ass men get deeply nerdy about the things they love. My name is Nacho, and joining me, as per usual, is Fred from How to RPG and the mighty glue stick himself, Mr. AJ Pickett.
Hello.
Hi.
So today we're going to visit a 1951 classic and touch briefly on a 2008 remake of a film known as The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is possibly one of the greatest science fiction films of all time.
It is officially the fifth greatest film, a sci-fi film of all time, according to the American Film Institute, and it is consistently ranked over its entire history in the top 10 in sci-fi movies in general. And it is commonly regarded as also I think it was the second big budget sci-fi film ever produced by a major studio. At the time, as I'll talk about later on, it was extremely risky and unusual for them to make this movie. In fact, Patricia Neal, one of the main actress, she had a hard time keeping a straight face during the telling her lines and stuff, because sci-fi movies at the time were considered so spoofy and stupid that nobody took them seriously. No, they were just stuff that you would take your girlfriend to drive through to get a jump scare thing, and it was just always a rubber suit monster sort of thing.
Yeah, they were part of science fiction. Was part of the horror genre.
Yeah,
it
was only in its infancy. I read the Hugo Award. The guy who was behind the Hugo Award, who was the producer of Astounding Stories and stuff like that, or Amazing Stories. I read his article, editorial, in the periodical where one of Harry Bates's stories first appeared, his most famous, second most famous story, which I was reading last night. And it was sci-fi was in its infancy in America and the world in general, and it had mostly been like comic books and things like that. And Harry Bates was very, very critical of the sci-fi writing at the time, saying it was all basically fantasy, not sci-fi, because sci-fi, as far as he was concerned, was very intelligent writing, and it was meant to be a extrapolation of known science. So it was a what's the speculation of where this technology is going? That's what he considered science fiction.
Yeah. Whereas, unfortunately, in the early days, it was really just another offshoot of horror. So aliens were always the bad monsters, and they were always there to either eat you or kill you or wipe you out. And that was the stories that we would get. Of course, the Day the Earth Stood Still came along and did something very, very different. And the other movie I'm assuming that you were talking about, that was the big studio movie of at the time, that was science fiction that was made, is War of the Worlds, I would imagine.
No, actually.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. It was Thing from Just Imagine in 1930 and Thing from Another World in 1951. That was RKO's first sci-fi thing. That was only 3 months earlier.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it must have done really well. I've never heard of it.
That's a major American studio. So other countries had made sci-fi as well.
Right. Oh, okay. You're talking about American. Okay, well, that's a bit different. Yeah. We'll give you that in terms of the Americans. But guess what, Americans? I think War of the Worlds is probably sitting in there, and your little thingy, the other one that you're talking about. Yeah, that didn't make the cut for me. So let's talk about The Day the Earth Stood Still, shall we?
Right.
It's probably the first cerebral science fiction film.
Yeah, very much so. So to give you some idea of how, there's one bit from Keanu Reeves' line from the second movie, which I just wanted to sort of address, where she asks him, what's the nature, what's your true nature, like what do you look like, where you come from, and he says the answer would only scare you. The answer is actually in this short story, and it's not addressed in the Gort character and Klaatu character in The Day the Earth Stood Still, because it was too out there. Even then, it was a twist that Harry Bates was kind of famous for putting into his stories.
Yeah.
Where when Newt, which is Gort's character, he's actually the master in the situation, and Klaatu is actually a cloned servant. Basically an expendable biological pet that is going to die shortly after. Like when Klaatu was saying nobody really knows, how long I'm going to live for or whatever, restore my life temporarily. So when Gort carries him back into the thing and revives him, that's basically how he created him in the first place. So Gort is the master, and Klaatu is basically just a servant. That's why the original story is called Farewell to the Master. So yeah,
we should probably put some context behind what you're talking about.
Right.
So what AJ is talking about is the film is based on a 1940 short story called Farewell to the Master, which appeared in a magazine known as Astounding Science Fiction, written by Harry Bates. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's based on a short story, which is
like most science fiction is actually.
Yeah.
Short, yeah.
This was a novella, so it was a bit more. Well, I think no, I think the Farewell to the Master was a short story, but he was mostly wrote novellas and things. But he was very much an editorial guy. He didn't do a lot of writing, but the writing that he did do was extremely good, and commonly regarded as the best that Astounding ever had. And he was very scathing of the lack of intelligent writing in magazines and periodicals, and so he established those competition between those magazines to make really good cerebral writing.
It's quite basic. It just flipped the script and saying, what if an alien landed with the goal to save the Earth rather than destroy it?
Yeah. Which is funny because it's a beneficial alien, but it's a horrific situation. In that he lands and he's basically informing the planet Earth that the entire galaxy has been conquered, and all these civilizations live under these machines that if anybody tries any interstellar conflict, the machines will turn up and wipe you out, essentially your entire planet.
Yeah.
So,
and the film kind of twists it more into a Cold War sort of situation, because this is post World War II. Everyone's potentially a commie.
Michael Rennie was an unknown actor in America. He was a British actor, but he was not very famous at all, and didn't do a lot of acting, really. He had, at the time, his acting career got interrupted by the war. He was a flight instructor and a fighter pilot. And when he told the other fighter pilots that he was with, they're talking about, what do you do in civilian life? And he says, I'm actually a screen actor. They all laughed at him. didn't think he was serious. And then they went and watched the matinee, and he was in it. And all his squad mates were like, what? It's true. Yeah.
Should I go through the cast?
Yeah, go for the cast. Do you want to do a quick explain very quickly what the plot of this movie? It's super simple. It's super simple, right?
Yeah, this one is super simple, whereas the 2008 is very convoluted. So, 1951, the day the Earth stood still. Its working title was actually The Day the World Stops, with Michael Rennie as Klaatu, the diplomatic alien, Patricia Neal as Helen Benson, a widow who aids him, Hugh Marlowe as Tom Stevens, her jealous boyfriend, Sam Jaffe as Professor Bernhardt, a scientist, and an annoying kid known as Bobby Benson. Directed by Robert Wise, who went on to do some he just jumped genres. He went on to do The Sound of Music, West Side Story, The Andromeda Strain, and also Star Trek: The Motion Picture. He kind of filmed this as more of a documentary type feel.
Yeah, it was put together in a kind of like a weird way from you. So Claude Rains was originally considered for the role of Klaatu, and also Spencer Tracy was probably the most famous actor that they had in RKO's stable of actors at the time. But remember, these guys were all career working for the studio. And Rennie had a very low opinion of the intelligence, the brainpower behind Hollywood in general, even back then when he arrived from England and was working in there. He was just like, these directors are fucking morons, like really idiots. And they probably, that was like probably their idiocy that allowed him to get that role in the first place, because they had these other guys in the wings who would have been much more famous. But the director was basically saying that Spencer Tracy, if he showed up out of the flying saucer and stepped out, people would have had all these previous expectations because he was very famous. So they would have had these ideas of what his characters were, but they had no idea about Rennie, of course. And Rennie is very famous for his even tone and even emotionalness. The only scene that was cut from the film was a scene where Klaatu displayed emotion. And the thing. One of the interesting things is none of the actors actually were in Washington. So much of the film was very, very Washington, down to like the radio stations. The presenters that they used, the radio presenters, were actual real radio presenters, so they were all famous and well known. But none of the principal actors actually were in Washington. So all those scenes with Bobby and Klaatu walking around in front of the monuments and stuff like that, that was all filmed with archive footage with them sort of matte put in front of it. But it's quite amazing, really, because you have no idea watching the movie. It's very, very well done. Very simple solutions to technical problems. So it was just like a masterwork in tight production, a really good professional studio.
So I'll quickly go through the plot. It is very uncomplicated, but a flying saucer lands in Washington, D.C. Klaatu emerges, offering peace, but is shot by a nervous soldier. Gort disengages his weapons. He's then hospitalized, but escapes using the alias Mr. Carpenter. He goes to a boarding house, which was really popular at the time. He then meets the Professor Bernhardt, solves a problem, halts global electricity. However, he does spare the essentials like hospitals, airplanes and whatnot. Yep. He does that to demonstrate his power. He is then killed by the military. Helen uses Klaatu Barada Nico to activate Gort, who revives Klaatu. Klaatu warns the scientist of an interplanetary force like Gort that could destroy the Earth if the aggression persists. Then he basically fucks off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to be very clear, which sometimes some people get a little bit confused, is Klaatu's quite adamant that he couldn't care less about humanity warring amongst itself on the planet.
Yeah.
But that if their nuclear power allows them to leave the planet and they start to engage in warfare outside of their planet with other, alien species, other entities within the galaxy, then the consequences are severe. And that's essentially the gist of it. It is a story about a warning. It is not a story about aliens coming and wiping you out or destroying you or anything like that. And Gort is almost exclusively defensive in nature. Unless you are offensive, usually doesn't do anything. There is except one scene. There is one scene where he is aggressive. He breaks the directive, and that is with the woman. What's her name again?
Patricia.
Patricia shows up, and Patricia does nothing offensive or aggressive, and he's about to vaporize her. And I think Klaatu was like, the problem is that once the robots start down this path, they really haven't been programmed to stop. So once they start dealing with aggression, they just start vaporizing everything. So there's a fatal flaw in how they are policed, you might say, and this movie sort of highlights that. And it kind of highlights the fact that if you think about the nations of the earth, most of the nations are ruled by a police state. If you break the rules, the police will get involved. If the police can't deal with it, the military will get involved. So if you do something that particular society doesn't like, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, if it's in law and they have the power, they will stop you. And what they're dealing with is just something like that. That's just bigger than the Earth. It's the same thing. It's just more global, as AJ was talking about. So I always find it interesting when I've seen a few people talk about this movie and say, "Oh, so we're supposed to give away, our rights and our freedom to do what we want and so forth, from and the nations we're part of, where we have democracy and so forth. It's for another one." And I'm like, dude, you haven't paid attention to the story. The simple fact is they're saying that as soon as you start dealing with a bigger pull, a bigger collection, a bigger part of the world, outside the world, it's the same sort of stuff. So you may not agree to those principles, but the reality is a lot of the principles that you're talking about are the same principles somebody else has got. So
Mm-hmm.
it is not really a reflection of fascism or anything like that, or an authoritarian government, because all of your governments are really authoritarian
Yeah.
ultimately. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It's kind of the way that the military was depicted in the film was not to the military's taste after the war and
No.
their victory and everything. They were kind of a little bit up themselves, and they refused to participate in the movie at all. And so they enlisted the National Guard, who were only too happy to depict the army as a bunch of idiots, essentially.
yeah. I mean, I think the problem with 1951 is the movie sort of depicts that humanity's refusal to listen. Right, that is basically the presentation, that humanity refuses to listen.
The insanity of the current leadership of the countries of the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah, but
and their inability to ever meet eye to eye and ever have a world peace,
yeah,
and essentially turning to the scientists, the intelligence of the planet, as the ruling body,
yeah.
and the ones who can actually communicate across borders with each other, which is true.
Mm. And also too, it
Yeah.
also depicts the average person is completely beyond rationality, like, having irrational beliefs and feelings, and really following the same sort of line that the government is.
Mm.
That, that they can't see past the fact that they don't really need to worry about, so, this alien is just suddenly a Russian, really.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um,
yeah, it's
did
depicting. It's
he come from
depicting.
another world, or did he just come from Russia? And
Yeah,
that comes up in the movie.
Yeah.
So it really does depict the government, the military, and the average person as being really sort of not able to get it,
yeah, because
and
it's seen from
foolish.
Klaatu's perspective. So
Yeah.
they've been studying the Earth for months and months and months, radio broadcasts and all that stuff before they get there. And
Mm,
Klaatu's obviously been programmed with human language and stuff. He's said, one of the characters says he's got a very clear New England accent, and that's to excuse the fact that he's got an English accent because he's from England.
mm,
But the radio broadcasts and the conversation at the breakfast table in the boarding house is particularly
yeah,
interesting, because that's him listening to humans, and because he wanted to get out of, because the military wanted to keep him locked up in a hospital away from anything. He said, I want to go out and meet people and talk to them, and they said, no, that's absolutely impossible. That's when he grabbed clothing and stuff,
mhm,
and took up the name Carpenter, showed up at the boarding house, and got a room there. And then in the morning, he basically got his assessment. And he wanted to get the perspective from an unbiased source. So he went and wandered around with Bobby, just out of sheer opportunity, because Patricia's character, sorry, I've forgotten what her name in the movie was.
Helen, someone.
Helen, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Helen.
so Helen basically was stuck needing a babysitter, and she just left him with a strange man, which these days would be completely unthinkable.
Yeah, that was
and-
something I pointed out in my notes. Was obviously no
So-
pedophiles
so-
or stuff in 1950s.
What's the most unbelievable thing in this movie? Her leaving her son with a stranger. No, and so he gets Bobby's perspective on things, and yeah, that the depiction of humans being scared of the unknown in such an aggressive fashion that the aliens would automatically be freaked out and worried about us because we are so dangerous and unpredictable. And of course, the first thing that happens when the UFO lands. Oh, interesting bit of trivia. They had to speed up the footage of the people running away. The bit that looks the most unnatural in the movie is the crowd running away from the flying saucer when it came down, because none of the extras would take it seriously and run in the park. The director is screaming at them, "There's a fucking massive flying saucer that's coming right down the middle. You got to run away screaming!" And they're all like wandering because it's a beautiful spring day. And he's just like, "Oh, jeez." They had to move on because it was costing them too much money. So that was that's the bit that he was the least happy with, the special effects.
Yeah, I have an issue with one major aspect of this movie, and I think it is unfortunately a product of not just 1951 version, but also 2008. And I can kind of understand the military being a little bit annoyed about how they are portrayed in this movie. So both films portray the military as really trigger-happy morons who have, who will just shoot at anything. Like, potentially they will start an intergalactic war. Like, if that is how your military operates, why the hell would you have them anywhere near the location for a meeting with somebody from another planet? And what is even worse is they are the first to shoot. It's not the alien that lands. They are the first to shoot. It's a very silly version of the military in the past and now. And I can kind of understand why they're annoyed by it, and the military didn't want to take part or be involved at all. I think a lot of people, look, you can say whatever you like about our governments and our leaders and the military, but the fact is that the military and political leaders would probably know that sticking young soldiers right up in the front line to face down complete aliens that they've never come across before, that's the unknown, and have them point guns and tanks at them is a really stupid shit thing to do. Like, pulling out a gun and pointing it at somebody in the first place is already a hostile act. Do you know what I mean? If you want to start a fight or a war, all you need to do is pull your gun from your holster or level your rifle at somebody, and you have signaled to them it is time to fight. You're going to shoot them. Because there's no other good reason to do so other than because you are planning to shoot somebody. So I think what would have been probably more likely to happen, and I feel like both these movies should have done this, is the government should have looked at the situation, and they would have cordoned off using probably not the military, because the military can't be mobilized that quickly, but the police would have cordoned off the area. There would have probably been instructions not to point guns at the alien ship that's just landed. And they probably would have made sure the cordoning off area was much further than just, a couple of feet, really? It wasn't very far at all, I would imagine.
No.
The government looks like a stupid, frightened child. And you can say whatever you like about governments, but they aren't a completely stupid, frightened child. It's a bit too much. I would imagine that they would have selected somebody who was unarmed as ambassadors to go and talk to the aliens and meet them, and there would have been no weapons on them. That would have been a much better depiction, I think.
They had time and warning, though, Fred. But this thing arrived in the atmosphere at 4,000 miles an hour and landed directly in the middle of Washington, D.C.
So you've got to. So here, I'm going to. Here's my argument, buddy. Washington, D.C., United Nations. It's right there. There are lots of fucking ambassadors. There's not going to be a problem.
It's
okay.
It's there now. Was it always there?
Even the police have got negotiators. And and negotiators do not go and negotiate with people by pulling out the gun and pointing it at them. So yeah, I think both movies failed pretty badly with regard to that. That would be what I have to say. Anyway.
So anyway, with no luck with the military, he went and sought out the scientific minds. After mentioned of Professor Barnhart on the news that he was listening to at breakfast, and then he said to Bobby after they went and visited Arlington National Cemetery, where Bobby's father was interred because he died in the war. By the way, Fred, there weren't a lot of old soldiers around at that time after the war because they all got shot. That was probably the part where he was showing emotion, where he would have seen all of the graves and said, did all of these people die in wars and stuff? And when Bobby was saying that his father was died, that was probably the most emotion that you saw on Reading's face during the whole film. But I'd say I'm not sure where the scene that they cut was, but I suspect it might have been there. Interesting though, because that was all archive footage. They never went to Arlington. They weren't at the statue of Lincoln and the words on the wall and things like that. But that was very much him saying, okay, these people have got potential, and of course for Klaatu, if you sort of step back and look at the broader picture, he's brand new. He's been constructed for this task. He's essentially a decoy. What you would say is if aliens showed up to Earth, and they would the first step would be to conceal their true existence. Because Gort didn't show up until there was an actual threat. He was not seen. He didn't step out first. They had no idea he was there. So the master of the situation was actually concealing himself, sending out a decoy, unarmed, nice little thing to calm everything down, because he realized that, he's dealing with uncultured primitives on their planet that haven't achieved, space flight or stuff yet, but they had achieved atomic power. And that was where, they were activated to, like, okay, this is now potentially a threatening world, so we need to go down there and announce ourselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, his mandate, Klaatu's mandate, was like, no, I can't tell in one individual nation. I have to tell the entire world, because that is what I am programmed, built to do. And if I don't do it, the alternative is my master will, wipe you all out, essentially. Yeah, and so he was desperate at that point, because if he went back and said, no, I can't get I can't deliver my directive to the entire planet, that would have been it for Earth. So he was desperate at that point and broke into Barnhar's house, and the equation on the wall on the blackboard was actually the three-body problem. That was actual physics, and the way it was written by an actual physicist. So that was an actual equation that he was writing a bullshit solution for, but that was real physics on the blackboard.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things that I find it interesting that the whole premise is that the message must be delivered to the entire planet, not to just one leader or one person. And the reluctance to give such a simple message, because the message is very simple, to one person, say, this is the message I want to tell the planet. Give me an audience. I feel like it played too heavily on that. You probably could have said, okay, look, you want to know what I'm going to say? This is what I'm going to say. Now, give me an audience. It is a small concession, and if you still have that person say, no, we're not going to let you stand in front of the United Nations and give that message to the leaders of the world, and they're not interested in listening to that anyway, that's a different thing. Then let it progress. I think that is one of the aspects of the story that could have been a bit stronger. It is one of the sort of holes that exists in 2008 as well, not just 1951. There are lots of little things that consistently look all right on paper and on film, but you have to understand that you're dealing with an audience. The audience has to believe it, right? And if you can't get the audience to see that it doesn't look silly or stupid, particularly when you're dealing with aliens landing on a planet, which, I'll tell you now, the day that the world has everybody see alien spaceships flying around, the whole lot, they'll all still be wondering, what the hell is that? they won't believe what they've seen. It's as simple as that. So
as a counterpoint, though, Fred, there is a precedent for gathering all the leaders in person, and that is when a new reign takes over and they have to swear fealty. So that was what it was actually about. Not just delivering a message, it was accepting the authority of the machines.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So basically he was saying, gather all your world leaders, take a knee. You're now under new management. And essentially, you're okay. We don't give a shit about local politics. But the moment you step up into intergalactic space, then you're in international waters, and the guns come off, and all of the Geneva Conventions go out the window. And if anybody starts a war, it's genocide, just automatically, because you can't protect from people firing at you from orbit. It's just too dangerous. That's reality, and that's a good message to give to the world today. Now that we're venturing out into space, China and America are heading up there. The war for resources is really picking up. Look at Russia and Ukraine and all that sort of stuff going on at the moment.
Yeah, well,
tariff wars and things.
China, America.
So if they take this up into space, we're all in terrible, terrible danger. I think we recognize that, and any other civilization that saw us going up into space would have every right to be very nervous.
Yeah, it's a really good message, that keeping your conflicts within your boundaries is fine, but you start bringing it out outside of that is a different story.
But the plausibility, I agree with you that considering the fact that he shut down the magnetic field of the Earth or some such affected like that, because that's the only way he could have done it without having satellites up there to affect the other side of the planet at the same time.
Mm.
if it was some sort of broadcast effect. That also rules out him broadcasting to the entire world at the same time, because physics-wise, it's very difficult to do that unless you have satellites and stuff bouncing around the ionosphere.
Yeah.
So it's easier to do actually if you're on the planet and above it. So
Mm.
yeah, it's not as simple as just tuning into everybody's, like taking over everybody's radios at the same time and getting them to broadcast a message.
Yeah.
Which logically, from a sort of a knee-jerk thing, that would have been simple plot solution to it. But physically, like science fiction extrapolation of physics, you couldn't do it. So that was clever on the part of Harry Bates, who researched his science behind these stories.
Yeah, and of course, I mean that's back in 1951. Now, in a modern, the modern age, it would have been significantly easier to be able to broadcast a message right across the entire planet if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I thought I wanted to talk really briefly about something you mentioned with the 1951 movie and the fact they used projection, back projection, front projection, and they weren't using necessarily. It's like old CGI, really.
Yeah, they had a lot of obviously practical special effects that were quite amazing. The guy who was inside the Gort costume, his name was Lock Martin Jr. He was 7'4", so massive dude.
Yeah.
And he was a really nice guy. He wasn't physically strong. He couldn't pick up Patricia Neal, so they had to use a string that you can see during one bit of the movie where he's carrying her back to the ship.
He was a doorman originally.
Yeah, at the Chinese theatre. Yeah, that's where he got cast. He had a couple of roles before that, but he was basically just, he ended up doing like children's shows and stuff. He loved kids. He had 9 children by the time he passed. So yeah. But,
I like that Fred's argument is this meeting could have just been an email.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not really my argument. My argument is that I won't give my message unless you let me tell my message exactly the way I want it right now.
Yeah, but my argument is he couldn't tell his message.
Yeah,
he could.
Yeah.
He was programmed to not. He was more a robot than Gort was. Really, that's the subversion of expectations that they sort of took away from the movie.
Yeah, but I mean
that was why it's such a good short story, because only at the end does Newt say, "I am the master, not the decoy." That my clone servant.
It kind of walks a fine line where his ultimatum is. It's meant to feel hopeful, but it's almost threatening. His ultimatum, like you could.
And in science fiction short stories, you do make like big leaps like that, and poorly and briefly explain things and things. So the deep considerations of like how would you communicate with the whole world and stuff is a minor thing in a short story. So it's hard to adapt that into a screenplay. He only got paid $500 US for the rights for RKA to produce his short story. He did not like the changes to the script, and he took that personally. And there was there was one instance where Harry Bates had one of his short stories edited by one of the editors. The editor then went and taught the first ever class on science fiction writing. And he had Harry Bates, who was supposed to show up as a guest lecturer. Harry Bates deliberately did not show up to embarrass him, which was kind of a signal of the fact that he was pissed off about his story being edited. So he's a petty man, not a great man. And later on, he suffered from terrible arthritis, which affected his ability to write. And he needed a testimonial from somebody to get his benefits that essentially would support him for the rest of his life. And it was that guy who edited his story who gave him the testimonial, and then Harry Bates sent him a note saying, "I ain't mad at you no more," because essentially he saved his life.
I guess my concern about that little part of it is such a small fix, and it would have reflected that the aliens did know and understand exactly how to communicate with a more primitive species, because they'd done it so many times before, and they knew the best way to do it. And I felt like this was sort of indicating that the aliens were kind of only slightly smarter than the humans. And that sort of I felt like makes it a little bit weaker. But going back to the special effects, the fact that it's in black and white actually helps hide a lot of the flaws in the special effects, which actually makes the film actually hold up when you watch it, many years later,
Mm.
can't see quite as many of the problems that a modern audience would be able to pick apart
Yeah.
and go a
You
bit
can't
silly
see the
about.
cracks
Yeah,
because they literally put putty on them.
yeah,
That's what they
Yeah.
did with the spaceship. Yeah,
Mm.
the seams on the spaceship when it seemed completely seamless, this metal thing, and they just had putty over top of it. And so when it opened up, the putty broke, and you don't see the seams.
yeah.
Simple solution to a complex problem that modern sci-fi movies would spend millions of dollars editing it out and stuff. It's just like, no, we'll just use putty.
Mm.
The Gort costume was so heavy that poor old Locke could barely move around in the damn thing, and he could only stay in it for an hour at a time because it was stiflingly hot, as you'd imagine.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's one of the aspects of the movie also too that it kind of suffers from looking like a person in a shiny rubber suit, because you can actually see the folds in the knees when it's walking, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Without that, most of the stuff you see holds up pretty well. It's only sort of that aspect of it.
Mm.
I actually
Yeah.
think that the Gort robot, this large galactic police robot, is terrifying in both movie versions, in my opinion. And
Mm.
I really like the original, but I actually think that the newer 2008 Gort robot is still very menacing with that disintegration ray. Uh,
Yeah.
it's even, I think the modern one has got the thing that m- makes them cower over it. It releases some sort of frequency sound that causes pain.
Yeah, it's got
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
locus,
In the second movie,
sort
in the
of like
second movie,
nanobots.
in the second movie, the Gort essentially is a nano swarm.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the Gort
Mm.
robot is just the swarm all together.
yeah,
And that's very realistic.
yeah.
So it's depicting robots because it's in this regard, it's a machine life form. It's
Mm,
not a robot.
yeah,
And that's why, and in the original movie, he's saying that they're a race of machines.
yeah,
So from our perspective, they're mechanical, but that they evolved that way somehow.
yeah,
But
Yeah.
again, a short story. It's not described where they come from or the history or anything, because that's not important because they're not inducted into the Galactic Society yet. So there's no point educating them before you're still deciding whether to destroy them or not.
yeah. And they're presented as indestructible. Like, there's nothing you could do. There's nothing you could cut through.
Yep.
There's nothing
Diamond
at
drill
all.
wouldn't work. Acid, fire, nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do to harm them
Yeah. It's like, oh, I've
whatsoever.
never seen anything like it. Well, it's literally, I can tell you officially, it's not from this planet.
Hmm.
Mm.
There is a really ridiculous and famous quote in this movie, and it's used in both, I suppose you might say. Klaatu barata
Nikto.
nikto. And it's been reused. Like it's shown up in the Evil Dead film.
Yep. It's also the name of the 3 people working on Jabba's skiff in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it is such a, and the people have gone to great lengths to try to figure out what the meaning of Klaatu barata nikto was, only to find that the person who created it wrote it down because he thought it sounded cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially.
It sounded cool.
Yeah. Also, talking of sound, the theremin was the mechanical instrument, the world's first technological instrument, was established and cemented by the theme song of this movie, the very, very famous woo woo sound that we hear in everything, horror and science fiction. This movie where they used 2 theremins tuned, one high and one low, playing against each other, was nobody had heard that sound before, and it's got so cemented.
Danny Elfman actually credits this film as one of his influences for his scores.
There was a reason why he went into becoming a composer. Yeah.
So the budget for this 1951, The Day the Earth Stood Still, was $1.2 million. Finally, it was supposed to be 900,000, but it went over budget, as things tend to do when you start trying to make something that nobody else has made before. And it wound up pulling in a worldwide gross profit of in 1951 of $3.7 million. So if you take the equation that you need to make about 3 times whatever the budget was to cover marketing and the cut from the theaters and all the rest, this movie made a tiny profit. Not a huge profit, but it made a small profit. It was not a failure. It is often presented as being a huge financial success, but it was not. It made a small amount of money. And, taking this into perspective, that you've got to understand that this is not the type of movie that the audience back in 1950 really took seriously. A lot of people did not really see it as something they would go and see. It's not an A-list or prime film.
Yeah, much like Star Wars, nobody involved in the movie, apart from maybe the writer and stuff and the director, expected this to be a hit. Even during it, none of the crowd took it seriously. All the crowd and stuff in the park and stuff, they were all government employees and FBI building employees and stuff like that. So none of them needed a release.
Science fiction wasn't a respectable genre.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't even a thing. It was barely even a field. It was, as Fred said, it was adventure stories and horror stories.
Yeah. It was just an aspect of horror.
Yeah, probably before Star Wars, you had 2001, Planet of the Apes. They were probably considered highbrow science fiction.
It was very highbrow, and there was a lot of complicated allegory and stuff like that. And the reason why he took the name Carpenter, obviously, is an allegory to his character being like a messiah, like Jesus, the sacrificial messenger. So.
Exactly. And 1951 film too, it's very hard to attract a modern audience to this film. One, because it's not in color, it's not high resolution. But that's not just another aspect. I love this movie a lot, but I can see where a modern audience would struggle with this. Just because it is not in color. But also the movie leans so heavily into the insanity of people during the Cold War period. And unfortunately, our modern audience, they aren't really in that boat. They're not experiencing the Cold War period. And unfortunately, 1950s audience is not going to be swayed by a science fiction movie talking about the stupidity of the Cold War. It's not going to be swayed by a movie. It's just not going to happen. And it also struggles to connect with a modern audience. So there is, unless you are a cinephile, you're really not going to get a huge amount of people terribly interested in this film, which is a shame. Because it shows its age, unfortunately.
Well, that's why they flipped the message with the 2008 to more of a sort of global global warming after
environmental. The fact that there are more life forms on this planet than just us. It's interesting because the short story was written in the 1940s, so it was before the war, and it was a warning about the war, which played out to be exactly as predicted. And, a nuclear weapon used at the end of it really made the story quite poignant and predictable. What do you call it? Prophesied. A prophecy, whatever. Premonition sort of thing. And that might have been what got it picked up or appealed to the director and RKO taking a shot at it and spending a lot of money on it. It could have just been like them just being stupid and spending a lot of money on this movie because that's what Hollywood does occasionally. They do things like that, spend a lot of money and then blow it by not marketing it, such as the Dread movie, for instance. By the way, contemporary news.
Oh, please don't. Well, I already know. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I know you're getting excited. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, send me a message.
Oh, okay.
But I suppose you're right. You are right though that why did it need to cost $1.2 million back in the day? Because it is basically a drama. It is not an action movie. There's not a lot of special effects.
You could have made it like a Doctor Who episode, really.
Yeah. It felt. Well, I think back in the day, the spaceship landing in the park was a big deal. And my understanding is that some of the things that they had to build were a bit expensive.
Yeah, the spaceship itself was quite a big, extensive build. The interior of the spaceship was designed after Frank Lloyd Wright's office building, So he had a very far out, like almost 1960s vibe to the decor. Using polymers and stuff like that, like resins and things like that, was unknown. So that was very, very futuristic looking. Also a bit Art Deco. And the Gorts, they had a fiberglass statue. They had a close-up, a larger bust for the visor opening and firing of the weapon. Firing of the weapon, of course, used reversed ricochet sounds, and the laser effect and the disintegration effect were essentially just post-production film effects that you do directly to the film. So, yeah, it would have been mostly just wages, time, and the production studio itself, RKO, being a big thing. So yeah, organizing all those extras, all of the National Guard and stuff like that, they would have been paid, or money would have changed hands for sure. And of course, permits, filming inside, they saved money by not filming in Washington. All the principal scenes and stuff, they used archive footage for a lot of it. So yeah, it could have been a lot more expensive actually, considering.
Yeah. Anyway, so I don't really have very much more that I have to say. My general feeling is that the character Klaatu is an appealing character. I like the character. I like the little boy. He's in a good reflection of sort of another aspect of, unsure what's going on but curious. And the mother, again, probably the most rational human in the entire story, is the mother, right? And then we've got that boyfriend who is the asshole, essentially, in the whole mix, who's out to just toe the line and get as much as he can in terms of cash out of anything that runs his way. So,
because we didn't mention the diamonds, did we?
Yeah, because
Right.
he uses diamonds to pay for stuff, and it's a bit of a surprise to suddenly see they're not exactly that small. They're big enough to be a big deal. So yeah.
One last little bit of trivia. In the original short story, Klaatu is killed immediately upon exiting the ship. He's got no dramatic part in the story at all. It's only at the end where Newt states that he is the master, not the pilot. So yeah, it would have been quite a different movie if it had been close to the original story. But yeah, that scene at the start of the 2018 one where Keanu Reeves' character is a mountain explorer, and he finds a object at the top of a mountain, which then essentially takes a genetic sample of him. So he's been cloned and recorded, and then when he shows up back out on the Earth, he's been grown inside the suit that he's wearing. So that is the only real, because they don't explain it, but that's the only real indication that he's not a real person. He's a biological replicant. So essentially, he's a remote controlled organic human. So they're just the machines are just using humans as components essentially, and that's probably the most science fiction thing. It's the most accurate way of representing where our technology is headed, where we're combining the two. And so Keanu Reeves not explaining it to thing and saying the answer will just like scare you is because they just don't have time to sort of. Nowadays we've got AI is coming and technology is coming out at us very quickly, and we see that large language models can interpret brainwaves. So we're not looking at integration of man and machine as like an intrusive sort of thing, but more of a gradual merge of the two, so that biological and mechanical blend together, and it just becomes intelligence in bodies, and it doesn't matter whether they're of a biological or a mechanical origin. Line blurs.
Well, do you want to go very briefly over the plot for the 2008 film, because it is actually quite different?
Yeah, I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so this one is directed by Scott Derrickson, who went on to do Doctor Strange. He's mostly known for his horror. It's got more of a environmental crisis rather than the nuclear sort of Cold War theme of the first film. So a sphere lands in Central Park. So this time it's moved from Washington, D.C. to Central Park, New York City. Klaatu emerges. He is shot. A Gort, who is now a nanotech robot, disables the threats with Klaatu Barada Nico. Klaatu,
Nikto.
in a human-like biosuit, Nikto, he escapes to assess humanity's environmental damage. He meets Helen and Jacob. I didn't realize that Jaden Smith was in this film until I watched it. I can't stand that kid. Consults Bernhardt, sees humanity's destruction, yet he sort of hints that they have got a redeemable nature. Gort, who actually has a anagram in this film, stands for genetically organized robotic technology, becomes a nanoswarm, consumes a lot of man-made objects, and then Klaatu sacrifices himself to stop the swarm, but he deactivates the sphere and all electronics, giving humanity a chance to change. So he basically disables everything at the end of this film.
And this film, and if you have a look at how it's structured, is more about, it starts off with, you think it's going to be giving a message, a warning to the humanity about their actions and the destruction of Earth and its survival. And it starts off like we look like we're going that way, but it seems very quickly we turn to he gets blocked. Klaatu gets blocked by one of the officials connected to the military or whatever, and then he decides to go and see an old friend who's been sitting, living on the planet for ages, asks his opinion whether the planet should be saved or not, and then makes this decision there. Does not. So it's not about giving a warning, and the warning is never given. This is basically a story about something's going to show up and wipe you out. Wipe you out so it saves the planet and humanity's gone. And that, I hate to say it, is a fucking bad way to structure a story if you want your audience to have any interest in watching it. And you create an alien that is so difficult to understand and identify with, that you have no interest in that character at all. I think because I believe Keanu Reeves was actually helped part of the writing process. He wrote a lot of his lines. A lot of the stuff got adjusted by him. He was actually, I believe, part of the production team as well. And I think Keanu was wrong to make Klaatu so unidentifiable and so alien, because if you look at the original Klaatu, he comes across as being a really nice guy. You can side with him. You don't feel like he's your enemy, but you do feel like Keanu Reeves' Klaatu is your enemy and cannot be trusted, and that he doesn't care about anything, and that is a problem. And so he just activates the thing, and away we go straight into let's wipe it. It basically turns this movie into Noah's Ark and a combination of War of the Worlds.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, and I think that is a shame. I think because it lost a lot of the message of the original film. This original story was trying to do something else. I really like the unique spaceship. That energy ball was just amazing. The alien metamorphosis was great. The special effects are obviously better than 1951, but it still looks like CGI. But they really did try hard with this movie to do a lot of stuff to move past some of the problems that the original movie had. But they created more problems by skipping a step. Like there needed to be, I think, if anything, that swarm of nanobots should never have ever come into play. And I suspect that there's somebody out there, when they put this idea forward, said, we have to have some action and some destruction and some threat. It can't be just a drama.
Yeah.
And I think that was the mistake they made. It probably, if they wanted to have more of an action movie, then it needs to be the chase for Klaatu to get to Klaatu, rather than the destruction of the world by a cloud of nanobots.
I think to be a true homage to the original movie, it has to be completely out of tone with the current international sentiment of the planet Earth, all the people and our current political climate and stuff like that. So I think really leaning into the fact that his body was just constructed and he was essentially a machine intelligence driving around a temporary humanoid body that they'd copied because they could just copy it, and they had no regard for humanoid life as unique or like, you're expendable. Essentially, we can just put intelligence in anything that we want. We can construct bodies, whether they're mechanical or biological. That would have been a compelling thing for the audience, and actually depicting it instead of just saying I'm too scary to contemplate. Because that's we're now entering that, because the original movie was very before its time.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been very before its time too, because we're now entering into that stage where we're getting freaked out about AI and all that sort of stuff now. But in 2018, it wasn't, we didn't have large language models. We didn't have AI producing, amazing film sequences and stuff like that were indistinguishable from reality. So now we've got the fear, but it would have been great to preempt that.
To go to engineered biology.
Yeah.
Which is the next step.
So it would have been. I think it would have been better if Gort had gone, boom, like that, and just infected the minds and remote controlled people, just using electromagnetism, instead of controlling all the machines and stuff and making the world stand still. He would have made all the people stand still and go.
Okay.
That would have been a much more interesting take, because it would have been more accurate to the original story, where Gort is the master of biological entities.
Bates didn't get a credit on this one. This is solely based on the 1951 film, not the short story.
Yeah, which is kind of ridiculous.
Also got nominated for a Razzie for worst remake, but it lost it to Indiana Jones in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, there are some aspects to this film that they have done really well, and they really did think hard about it. But like I said, you can't make a movie that does not give a warning to the humanity, and then decides to shortcuts that step, and then decides we're showing up to wipe you all out. It's just not going to work. And guess what? We're allowed to do this because you guys have been shitty with your home that you're living on. And it's not your home. You're leasing it. You're only here for a little while. It doesn't attract an audience to be interested in the story. And sometimes you have to fold science fiction in and package it in such a way without forcing it down somebody's throat. You have to package it in such a way that people have the potential to start thinking about it and slowly assimilating and taking on board the concept and thinking, okay, maybe there's a point here. But this movie is unable to do that. And I have to say that I think that the 2008 movie suffers from the same problem, because I don't think the 1951 movie ever does that as well, even though it is certainly, I think, a better depiction of the original story and what it's trying to do. Because, at least there's a warning. And you're not showing up to say, okay, we're here to wipe you out. There's a lot more character development. Klaatu gets more character development in 2008 than the older movie. And so does Helen.
Convoluted, though.
And so does the little boy, who is a pain in the ass, as far as I don't like that character very much.
Yeah.
No.
But at least Klaatu...
That was an homage to Will Smith, apparently.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, casting him because it's Will Smith's kid. So it's meant to be some sort of subtle Easter egg for Independence Day.
Yeah. Kathy Bates in that story really represents the stupidity of leadership and that knee-jerk reaction and the aggressiveness, where she can't. She's looking at trying to control the situation the entire time. And only at the end realizing that she never had any control. And it's just so far outside of her understanding.
Yeah, and at least she has character development as well. She, but you're right. It's outside of her control, and when she realizes, actually, we just need to just back off, and unfortunately, the president is not going to back off. Things sort of go a bit haywire. This film is quite expensive. The budget for the 2008 movie was $80 million for The Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves and so forth. And of course, we have Jennifer Connelly. Yes, she's in another movie. Wonderful. worldwide budget for this was $80 million, but it made $233 million worldwide, which means it didn't quite make its money back with marketing, the budget, and the theatre cut. So it had a small loss, not a huge loss, a small loss. But this is to be expected. Again, this story, to communicate it to an audience and for it to be successful, you have to be really, really clever at structuring it. I think that's a really hard thing to ask for. You know, how do you do this and present it to an audience so they just don't switch off and say, fuck you, I don't want to hear this?
That was the conversation between Klaatu and Mr. Wu, where they're sitting in the McDonald's, which is funny because it's, just McDonald's. And he's saying that, that he was saying, you've been out of contact for a long time. It's like, oh, they're a dangerous race. He's like, yeah, I've noticed. I've been trying to reason with them, but they're not a reasonable species. And he's like, there's value here. And it was really the conversation between him and Mr. Wu that changed his mind. And then he was sort of looking at Jaden Smith's character in a new light when he realized he was aggressive because of fear and loss. And it was, but at that point, of course, there wasn't much he could do because it had already been decided. So The Day the Earth Stood Still 2008 was actually a sequel to the movie when you think about it. It was like, okay, the first time they arrived, it would have been better if it had been like, okay, there was some spectacle back in the 1950s that everybody sort of forgot about, and considered widely to be a hoax. So that would have been an interesting sort of thing to put in the background, an homage to this being a real world event that happened. And maybe, they all ignored it and the message didn't get through and stuff. And that would have been, okay, I see. Okay, so this is an extrapolation to they turned back up in 2008 and now it's time to destroy. This is how they demolished the Earth. And then it would be a race to stop it sort of thing. But it wasn't depicted that way. And I think that was a foolish thing to do. Last comment. There actually is a meaning to Klaatu Barada Nikto. It's been theorized that when he came up with these words, he was looking at languages from the Indian subcontinent. In Kannada, the language Kannada, Barada means coming. In Hindi, Nikto means nearby. Therefore, it means Klaatu is coming nearby.
Okay.
Klaatu Barada Nikto. Klaatu's on his way. He's coming. Like, cool. Calm down. He's coming. He's coming. Yeah.
Another problem with the 2008 movie is it's a lot more depressing and dark than the original movie.
Yeah, mind you, so was 2008.
Well, the 2008 movie was much darker than the 1951 movie.
It's dark.
And I always find that going too dark can often not go well with an audience, because it doesn't really have any light periods. There's no light at the end. And with a story like this, where it's a story, the story is like, if you don't change your ways, you will be wiped out and be destroyed. You have to find some light at the end of the tunnel, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel. So that's a difficult one. I think, Keanu Reeves' portrayal of Klaatu as being uncaring, uninformed, emotionless, really makes it impossible for an audience to connect with him, like I said before. And you can't do that. They did such a great job with all the other characters. The other characters are actually pretty solid in terms of how they're portrayed. Keanu is the one weak aspect of the whole thing. And I don't know about you, but that traumatized boy played by Jaden, who lost his father in the 2008 version, who lives with his stepmother, he's unlikable.
Oh yeah,
he's
unlikable in real life.
And he
funny that
he does have a character development. I mean, he does develop throughout the story, but he's such an unpleasant little individual. You're like, you couldn't care less for him.
Yeah,
that's another problem. Something that they did much better in 1951. The boy, you actually do give a shit about the boy. You know. I honestly think that both films actually failed to deliver a clear message throughout the story. and provide a solution, because this is one of the things that this story I think needs to have that it doesn't have, that probably isn't included in the original short story. It's not in the films. The audience already knows that war is foolish. Okay, they already know that war is foolish. They already know that the planet is at risk from, destruction from humanity. But they have no idea, the general population has no idea how to get their leaders to stop fighting other nations. And this story has the potential to provide that solution, and they don't do it. The answer is actually in the story's title. The problem that you have, the solution is in the title. If you can't change the way that humanity is going through your leaders and your military, through elections or protesting in the streets or rioting, because that might not work. Quite often it doesn't. But this story suggests that by sabotaging the power supply, that would be the most effective method of disrupting government power. And when government, is feeding society and economy through waging war to fuel their nation and ensure resources and stuff like that, that is probably the most efficient way to deal with it. And I always felt like both movies, when the day the Earth stood still, it only stands still for 30 minutes, not a whole day. Like 30 minutes is inconvenient, right? It's inconvenient, but a whole day is a bit different. If everything stops that's electronic and electrical for an entire day, that would actually stand out and have an impact. But 30 minutes is just not long enough. And I think ultimately what probably should have been done is they should have taken the concept of waging war amongst themselves and then bringing that outside of, off planet into the galaxy from the original story, and talked about the fact that this planet is too valuable to be lost to one species destroying it. I think those two messages would have probably helped a lot more, because they sort of they feed on two of the major things that we were always going to have to deal with, and that is looking after our planet and waging war. And these are never probably going to go away for any time soon, right? I think that would have probably been a little bit better to actually, to highlight that. Guess what? If you want to change things, these are the things you can try. It would have been even interesting if Klaatu had seen that people had tried to use elections to get things done, and protesting and rioting and trying to apply pressure that way, and it did not succeed. And then, well, I'll show you how it's done. Make the Earth stand still, shut it all down, and I think that might have had a bit more of an impact. It's hard to know. I don't know that anybody's been successful with this story. It's a hard one.
I think we might see another adaptation of it, and continually throughout history going forward, because it is such a important pivotal film, and its message is just as applicable now as it was then, even more so. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to certainly make a podcast about and discuss. And yes, it's got its merits and flaws. Everything does, but the kernel of it, that warning that that we live in a time of right now of flux, where things are changing quite dramatically, like to the point where superpowers may rearrange themselves. The structure of the organizations of the Pacific and Europe and things like that are changing. And technology is rapidly changing. Our economy is rapidly changing. Our lifestyles are rapidly changing. People are in an uncertain time. And at the moment, of course, we've got some very barefaced psychopaths who are rampaging around and dictating how they think society should operate. And they've got the clout to do it because we've let them accumulate it. So I think the message now would be the one that the message which I said that should be run counter to everything is, let's take away money.
Yeah, money is probably
Talking
another
about
one.
the power that runs things. Okay,
Mm,
well, the worst psychopaths on the planet right now are financial psychopaths.
mm,
Right, those are the ones that are acting like complete lunatics with share prices and things like that. At the moment, there's so much as a rumor of Donald Trump farting and the share prices plummet. That's ridiculous. So it's people's lives that you're talking about. That's physical labor and production that they're playing around with like it's not real. Because for them it isn't. It's just, status quo and dick measuring between them. Um, I think the best thing to do would just remove the power that they have in that situation, which is remove their money. Just
yeah,
get rid of it. And all of a sudden, what are these resources? Well, they're not something that you can speculate on. They're not something that you can't gain wealth by selling debt that doesn't exist. So mortgages won't exist anymore and things like that. Everything will be reduced down to concrete, real things. And
right. So in
so
other words, you're talking about electronic money,
I'm talking about the very concept of money.
right?
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so just get rid of the representative of exchange and just say, okay, no, we need to look at everything because now we have, it was too complicated to transport things or too complicated to do all this stuff. Or it was only ever supposed to be a note like an IOU. This represents a real thing, but as soon as money doesn't represent a real thing, and all of a sudden it's a speculative thing, like when you go and get a mortgage, you're not getting money from the bank that the bank owns. They are inventing that money, saying, okay, now because you owe us something,
Mm,
that debt is now a commodity, and that's how they make their money. So they say, okay, we because you owe us $15,000, that's the same as us having $15,000. So we're going to sell that debt as if it's an actual $15,000. That's how you get inflation. That's how you get financial crashes. That's how you get outrageous property values. That's how
yeah.
you get commodities going up and skyrocketing and things. That's
So
how you get this continual financial growth in a closed system. So I think that's the message that we should give to everybody. We're living in a situation where the idea of continual growth in a closed system with limited resources that we all recognize as a species that we must conserve and we must cooperate now more than ever together across international borders to protect ourselves as a species against an oncoming onslaught of devastated demographics, complete destruction of our economic systems because they are not logical. They don't fit the situation, and we're powerless to do anything about it because we've got all of these maniacs who have all of this money and are accumulating massive amounts of money. The trickle down effect doesn't work, and people are powerless to do anything about it because they've been locked into this idea that they don't have any power to do anything about it. But all they have to do is, like the alien, cut off that supply of power, cut off the money.
you might have a
Spending-
you might have a point there because you're right. Electricity power is a major aspect of why the world operates the way it does, but also is money, and money nowadays is stored electronically. So what happens if you turn off the power, but he not only turns off the power, but shuts down all the servers, so there are no more records. That means there's no record of all the money that you have tied up electronically. It doesn't exist. A
Mm.
lot of that money, it does not exist in gold or in physical property. It's just ones and zeros.
The
So
most significant attack we've had on America in the last, my lifetime has been the Twin Tower attacks, where they worked out the financial records.
yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think the combination of the power and wiping out the records of money might actually be a really good message to give to people. Like, this is actually how you change it, and the threat is the war between each other is stupid, but taking that war off planet to somebody and to other aliens would be foolish. You can't beat a more advanced civilization. You'll always lose. That
Mm,
needs to be the message. And destroying your own planet, wreaking havoc on it, well, you eventually you're committing suicide.
mm, yeah.
It's
So I think the
genocide.
message really is that you can't look for solutions to come down from the top. You must create the solution yourself by
Mm,
your own choices and your own actions.
yeah.
And that's the really important message: is that you do have power, and your power is very fundamental because all of these organizations governments only exist because they take money from you. Corporations only exist because they are continually taking money for you from shareholders. So in the regards to companies and corporations, shareholders construct corporations as a shield from any responsibility for their financial activities. That must stop immediately.
Mm.
We must stop immediately governments assuming taxes are just their right. It isn't. That money is voluntarily given by the population to the government for the for roading infrastructure, protection of the weak, and support in education. The moment that money is spent on military aggression and things like that, it should be immediately removed. All of the militaries around the world should be defunded immediately. It's just ridiculous, because we're not in a situation where conflict is going to solve anything. No. It's only going to make it worse. So yeah, more so than ever, any conflict right now is just innocent people already dead, because the resources that are spent on that stupid conflict and stupid escalation of arms is resources that could have saved lives when disasters hit. We should be building shelters. We should be building rescue. We should be building survival packs. We should be building roading, all of the stuff to protect ourselves from what we all know is coming. Yeah. And it's not inevitable. It can be changed. We're not on a one-track path to destruction, and it's up to you individuals to recognize that you have the power to change it. Yeah. And if you don't, it's on you.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff, man.
It is heavy stuff, but I think, as I said, I think that the day the Earth stood still is heavy stuff.
It's heavy stuff.
It's really heavy stuff, because it's trying to say you have to make things change.
It's the survival of the species, baby.
If you want to progress on and keep going, you have to make changes. And
because at the moment we don't have an external force coming in and telling us what to do.
No.
We don't have a Messiah coming down from the heavens and giving us a guiding light and an ultimatum. We don't have that luxury. We have to make our minds up ourselves. We have to dig ourselves out of our own hole. And it's not inevitable. I think we can. I think we will. I'm pretty damn sure we will. We will survive this.
There's only one other option.
Yeah. We will survive this, but we will not be the same species at the end of it. That's for sure.
That's all I have to say, Hacho.
Yep, I'm done.
All right, well, let's wrap it up, eh? Thanks, everyone.
That little announcement was that Carl Urban and the team behind The Boys at Amazon, the last season of The Boys will be is wrapping up their show, so they're looking at something else to do, and Carl Urban has whispered in their ear. He's very popular at Amazon right now, so he's got a lot of clout there, which is damn straight he should. And he wants to do Dredd, and they have said they've got a tentative green light on The Boys team doing a Dredd series.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. So happy Easter, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Sorry if I was a little bit quiet today. I was having fucking nightmare with my internet. You guys were about 10 seconds behind me. So, yeah, I'm sure it's all right in the edit, but yep. It is what it is. All right. Well, and it is good night from me.
And it's good night from them.
And it's good night from Klaatu, your friendly alien, giving you a warning. Don't be a dick.
Thanks, everyone.